Let's get started. Today's topic of the theory lesson is something that is very relevant if you want to build Angular applications for mobile platforms. We are going to talk about responsive layouts. I'm pretty sure you have heard about the term responsive layouts. What is responsive layouts? What does responsive mean?
Automatically resizes on depending on the device. For example, laptop or smartphone.
Okay, it depends on the device, it depends on the size of the screen, and depends on the orientation of the screen, portrait or landscape. You say resize. Does resize mean if we have a smaller device we just make everything smaller? Well, of course not. That would be a stupid strategy, because if you try to zoom out from a very, let's say, text-heavy website, nobody could read anything on that website anymore. It wouldn't work. Another thing is, if we make all the things smaller and smaller and smaller, it's not only hard to read, it's also hard to interact with it, because the buttons are getting smaller, and on those devices you typically use your finger, not the mouse, and your finger is pretty large compared to a mouse. So therefore, just resizing isn't enough to become responsive. So what does responsive mean? What are typical strategies to make a web application responsive, not just resizing? What could you do? Well, one thing that you could do is you could rearrange things. If you have a pretty large screen, then maybe you display data in a more complex grid where you display data side by side, one column after the other. If you have a rather small screen, maybe in portrait mode, you turn it around. You don't use a column layout, but you display the things one below each other. So you stack them vertically, not just horizontally. So you can change the orientation. No, sorry, the layout from columns to rows. Another thing that you could do is you could conditionally hide things. You know what the burger menu is? I'm pretty sure you have used it already. This is the menu on the left-hand side of the screen with the three lines, and if you click on it, you get the menu, for instance. So you're just hiding the menu, and you only display it if the user really wants to see it. Okay? Depending on the screen. If you have a really big screen, you can always display all the menu items, but on a small screen, you just hide them conditionally. What else? You can change the whole navigation. If you have a large screen, you can display an overview list of customers, for instance, and if the user clicks on a customer, you immediately show the details of the customers to the side of the overview list, and you keep the overview list on the screen. If you have a small screen and the user selects a customer, you're just navigating away completely, and you are putting aside the list of customers, and you're just focusing on the details. So you can change the whole navigation, the whole user experience design if you want, depending on the screen. Another typical strategy that you could do is you could exchange text with icons. Instead of having a button saying save document, you can just use an icon with a disk symbol. If the user only has small screens, he will probably be okay with an icon instead of text. If you have a big screen, text in a button might be more clear for the user so that he understands what this button really does. It depends on the screen size. Any other strategies that you can think of? There is a very radical strategy also, and this strategy is just don't make your app responsive. Create multiple apps. And this is sometimes the exactly correct way to go. Sometimes it makes more sense to build two very different apps for two different form factors. The app for your phone might look and feel and behave entirely different than the app for the big screen 24-inch monitor with keyboard and mouse. Could be. Then we have really different apps, not just responsive apps. But today I would like to talk with you about how to build responsive apps with web technology. Okay, so let's open our slides. And if we go to Angular, where is it? Come on, come on, come on, load it, internet, here it is, and somewhere here it should be. Here it is. In web development, you primarily have two technologies that you use in modern applications when you build responsive apps. One is Flexbox CSS, and the other one is media queries. Let's start with Flexbox CSS. What is Flexbox CSS? Flexbox CSS, here you have the link in the slides, is a standard from the W3C, and it's pretty well implemented in a lot of different browsers. So let me sit down here. If we go to caniuse.com and we say, what about CSS Flexbox? And here you see a lot of greens, so all major current browsers support it. If we say usage relative, you see the greens are even more dominant. Just if you look at very old browsers like Internet Explorer 6 or 9 or something like this, they don't support Flexbox. All of the others, they pretty much support this thing, so it's more or less safe to use it. So what does this Flexbox do? The first thing that this Flexbox can do, it can change the orientation of the content from row to column. If Flexbox speaks about a row, it means that it arranges the items one side by side to each other. So this would be flex direction row. So if you need to display 5 things on a pretty large monitor, you would probably go for flex layout row. If you have to display something on a portrait phone, you would probably switch to FX flex direction column. Column means that the things are stacked vertically, not horizontally. How does that look like? Well, here we have a small example. Let's zoom in a little bit. Here you have the content, this is the content, and here on the top you have the container item. The container item, this div with class box, is the item where you say display flex. This display flex enables Flexbox. So you always define the flex setting on the container, and that changes how its children are layouted. You get what I mean? You can nest these things. So you can have a row. Inside of the row you have a div with layout column. So you have multiple columns in this row. Inside of these columns you can again have rows. Inside of these rows you can again have columns and columns in rows and rows and columns, and I think you get the idea. Okay? The logic is always the container item defines the orientation of its children. If you want to change the orientation, you just say, give me this flex direction. In this case, we just say row reverse. Good? Not difficult. Absolutely not. It really works very nice and it's not very complicated. Another thing that is important when it comes to responsive layout is wrapping. What you can say is you can say, give me a flex row, that means 1, 2, 3, but if the screen is too small, just wrap it around and put the things that don't have any space anymore in the next line. So in this case, 3 is on the next line because it would not fit in the first row, so it automatically repeats the rows. And you don't have to write a single line of code for that. You get what I'm saying? So if we respond to the size of the screen. Then we can define certain properties on the flex items. So these are the items which are inside of the container. We can, for instance, say whether these items should grow or whether they should shrink, or what's the basis, so the original sizes and so on. I will not go into the details because we only have 1 hour, but let me put it that way. these properties are pretty impressive and pretty powerful. If you want to use them in your own projects, just Google CSS Flexbox. You will probably come to an article which says a complete guide to Flexbox. I really like that one. I open it pretty often because it's a nice graphical description of what you can do with CSS Flexbox. I encourage you to take a look at this article whenever you need it in projects. It's currently one of the best articles I know, describing on a very short page in just a few graphics and paragraphs what CSS Flexbox can do. I record this session on video, so you can look up the link later on if you need it, okay? However, does Flexbox already make our application responsive? Well, to a certain degree, with the wrapping and so on, but not very powerful. Because what we said is, well, if we have a wide screen, use a row layout. If we have a small screen, use a column layout. How do we switch? In CSS, we can switch using so-called media queries. Let me show you what media queries are. Let's take the first link. This is a media query. You just say add media screen, and then you can, for instance, define a maximum width or a minimum width or something like this. So you just define CSS depending on the size of the screen. And this is exactly what you could do. You could say media query if I have 700 pixel or less on the horizontal axis, use a column layout because I'm probably in portrait mode. If I have more than 700 pixels, I'm in landscape mode, and I can use a row layout. You know what I mean? You don't have to change your app. With media queries in CSS, you can do that automatically. Good? Nice. Again, there is a lot more to say about media queries, but you will find it out once you need it. It's just important that you now know that media queries exist and that they play well with CSS Flexbox. Now the good news. We don't need that if we use Angular. Because in Angular, we have a package which is called Angular Flex Layout, and you can see it's from the Angular team, or at least it's under the umbrella of the Angular project, and this Angular Flex Layout makes everything much simpler. And that's a good news. Let me show you what this Angular Flex Layout can do. First, it's pretty simple to install. Just execute one npm install. That's nothing that should bother you anymore. This is what you have to do in your ng module. So the only import that you need is the Flex Layout module, and you get everything that Flex Layout can do. That's it. And then you are good to go. You use this stuff by just using these properties. So instead of writing complex CSS files, you just say, for instance, diff fx layout row. And that's it. And with that, you're switching to row layout. And the important thing is that these directives here are data binding enabled. So what you could even do, if we remove the coloring here again, you could put them in brackets, in square brackets, and then use an expression here. You can do data binding. And immediately you can let the user choose. Do you want to display it in a row or in columns? You click the button, you change a variable, and boom, everything is changed automatically. Get the idea? That's the difference between Angular Flex Layout and CSS Flexbox. Angular Flex Layout has been built so that Flexbox CSS nicely integrates in the whole ecosystem of Angular with data binding and observables and things like that. Good. So let's take a look what this stuff can do for us. There is a nice interactive demo, and we will try it out in a second in our own application. For instance, imagine you have these 5 boxes. What could this be? This could be some charts in a dashboard application. This could be entry fields, text inputs in a form or something like this. And what you essentially do in the container, you say diff fx layout row. And if I switch to column, the only thing that we have to change is here diff layout column, and you see we have it in the columns. And now we can do interesting things. If we go to row, I can experiment with, come on, Here, end or space around or space between or space evenly or center or start or none, and I can say please stretch this stuff or make it in this way, stretch it in that way, no, center it. I think you get the idea. All you have to do is change these two properties on the container element, container div, and you get all these nice little effects for free. The only thing that we have to learn now is how to make them depending on the screen size, right? If we have a big screen, we arrange things differently than on a small screen. Okay so far? Yeah? Good, good, good. So let's give it a try. What I have done for this exercise, for this lesson, is I have taken the website of our upcoming Global Azure Bootcamp. This is an event that we have on Saturday in the Wissensturm. By the way, there are 2 or 3 tickets left if you're interested. Here is the program. And what I did for this lesson, I took this program, which are markdown files on GitHub, and I exported them to JSON. And then I put a little web API on top of it, and now we can try to build a poor man's version of this agenda just using Flexbox, okay? Let me show you what our goal is. Currently, our situation looks like this. This isn't pretty impressive. We just have the time slots, and then we see the different talks, as you can see it here. The talk descriptions are in German, so yeah, we understand. What I want to have is something like this. Let me quickly remove the simple here. By the way, this example is in GitHub. So just take a look at the Angular folder of the GitHub repository. There you will find a conference agenda sample, so you can take a look at this code. This is what I would like to have. If I have a pretty big screen, you see, here are the times, and then I just stack the different sessions here to the right. And if I make it a little bit more smaller, at some point we are putting the time on top of the different sessions. And if I make it even smaller and smaller and smaller, at a certain point in time, I arrange it vertically, no more horizontal stuff. I can try that with different devices. For instance, if we simulate an iPhone X, that looks good. If we do that, oh, that looks good. You see, time is on top of that one. And if I go to, for instance, an iPad, and yeah, then I have everything on one screen, looks pretty nice, exactly what I want to have. If I turn it around again, it also looks nice. We want to achieve this by not writing a single line of CSS and by just adding 2 or 3 lines in our HTML template. That's the point that we want to reach. So let's take a look. Let's go back to our simple version, and then I will copy in code step by step to demonstrate how this is done. I will not talk about the HTTP client stuff here. It's really trivial. You can take a look at it. The only thing that I am currently interested in is this current version that we have here. Let me zoom in a little bit. And the final version that is here. And I would like to show it to you step by step. First things, as you see here, we have an ng40 over the different slots. Let's give these slots a little bit of a class. The only thing that this class does, it's adding this nice gray background, nothing else. So that was easy. That has nothing to do with Flexbox. I'm not a designer, by the way, so I'm not capable of building awesome applications. I can select a background color, that's possible. So now what we can do is we can say fx layout and put it here, fx layout, and say put it in a row instead of a column, and then see what's going to happen. Now we have the time here, one element, and in the same row we have the next element. See that one? Time, row, time, row. If we switch that to column, you will see that we now have time and below the content. I think you get the idea, right? Good. But how can we make that responsive? The answer is this one. If we go to Flex Layout here and go to the API documentation, then we will find a chapter which is called Responsive API. And there we will see that Flex Layout comes with predefined media queries. So they say we have extra small devices, medium devices, large devices, and extra large devices. 4K, Full HD, and I think you can read the rest. Additionally, they give you lower than and greater than media queries. So essentially what we do is we say, yes, I want to have a Flex Layout, but I want to have a different Flex Layout depending on whether the screen is lower than medium. Lower than medium means small or extra small. And if I want to have row if I have something greater than small. So medium, large, or extra large. This is how you can make your app in a pretty basic way, granted, but still responsive. So now, if I make it smaller, it works. See it? And we didn't have to change much. Next one. We can also define the layouting of our elements. Let me copy that one in and show you what this can do for us. This fx layout align tells me if it's greater than small, so if we are in row layout, please arrange the children on the horizontal axis, start, so it's left aligned, and on the vertical axis, center it. If we do that one, you will see if we make it larger. Now, as you can see here, it's now centered, just as promised. Get the idea? Good. Questions so far? Nice. Next one. Now this is just a little bit of formatting, nothing special, get rid of that one. The only thing that I did here is I changed the font and I changed the font size and I'm making it non-wrapping, so I prevent any kind of wrapping here. That has nothing to do with Flexbox, that's just CSS. Now, the next div that we insert, well, let's copy both lines here. So, and close the div, and close the div, and let's do it like that. Let's see what we did now. With only these things, we already have now, if you zoom in a little bit, column layout. And if I make it a little bit larger, now we have a row layout because the things are now side by side, not one stacked on each other vertically. How was that done? The point here is that I would like to make is we are nesting layout in layout. You get the idea? On the top level, I have a layout which contains of the time and all sessions. And now I'm nesting another Flex layout just for the sessions. Get the idea? And I can independently define whether I want to have column or row inside of the nested Flex layout. Get the idea? And with that, let me show you again. If I have a large one, now we have top level layout row and nested layout row. If I make it a little bit smaller, we now have in the outer one column, because we have it one below each other, and in the inner one row. And if I make it even smaller, now we have in the outer one column, because we have one down below the other, and here also column, because we want to have everything one below each other. You get the idea? And again, I didn't have to change anything in the TypeScript code because here we have the media queries built in. Let's add the rest. It's really trivial. It's just a little bit of formatting. It's just fonts and background images, background colors and things like that. And with that, we should be done. We have a nice little application which does what it should do. Well, nearly. I forgot one class here. Yeah, I forgot this line. It's just setting a lighter gray And now we have what I promised you. Okay? Is the motivation of this stuff clear? Do you understand how this helps us to build responsive applications? Flexbox is nicely integrated in Angular. I told you that already. And Flexbox is also very nicely integrated with Angular Material. So if you use Angular Material as your CSS or control library, you can use Flexbox to make your Angular Material design responsive. Okay? These things work very nicely together. It is called Angular Flexbox, so it only makes sense together with Angular. You cannot make a jQuery-based application or Vue-based application with this package. There are other packages for those libraries, or you use just plain CSS Flexbox. That's of course also possible. Good? This Flex layout stuff is capable of doing many, many additional things. Let me quickly check something. This Flexbox stuff, Flex layout stuff, is capable of doing many, many additional things. For instance, there are two different APIs, and if you see these APIs here, there is a static API and a responsive API. The static API defines things like the layout. Do you want to have it in row or column? Do you want to wrap it or not? Do you want to center or stretch or whatever? But it doesn't contain any kind of media queries. So the layout will always look the same independent of the screen resolution. The second kind of API, or the responsive API, uses exactly the same things but has these postfixes. So whenever you want to make something depending on the screen size, you just append these postfixes. All the other things apply equally. So if you want to understand the API, go first to the static API, then click on this thing here, read the documentation, make sure you understand it. And then, if necessary, add media queries by saying .md or .ltmd or whatever you want to have. Got the idea? So static layout is a good thing to start with, and responsive layout is the second step. What Flexbox can also do, it can also provide you with a grid system. So maybe sometimes you think in how many columns does my screen have, how many rows does my screen have, and you would like to arrange things in a more grid-like way. Not so much in rows and columns with wrapping, but sometimes you need these grids, and you have this col span where you have something that spans over many columns, or you have this row span where something spans over many rows. Then you can use the GD align rows, GD areas, GD auto, and so on. Google it, I'm pretty sure you will find an example. We have not enough time to discuss it here in the lesson, but if you need it, now you know that Angular Flexbox can provide something like this. Okay? It will not be necessary in this course to successfully complete it, but it's good to know. Last but not least, there is also a TypeScript API. And one of the most important APIs is this guy here. It's the Media Observer. The Media Observer is a service that you can inject through the constructor. Can you remember? We had that concept when we talked about HTTP client. If we wanted to have an HTTP client, what did we do? Constructor, private HTTP client, and Angular gave us the HTTP client. This is exactly the same, but this time we ask for a media observer, as you can see here. And this media observer has primarily one property. It's this media dollar property. The dollar sign indicates that this is not a normal property, but it is an observable. Can you remember from last time what an observable is? This was this RxJS stuff with the async and so on. Maybe you can guess from the context what the media observer can do. The media observer gives you an observable that sends you a message whenever the screen size changes. Get the idea? So you can subscribe to the media dollar, and then you are notified whenever the user, for instance, switch from portrait to landscape. Maybe you need to load additional data from the server because now you have more space and you can present more data. With that, you can react in your code without having to manually observe the size of the screen and the orientation of your devices. You just listen to this observable and everything's fine. And if you become more familiar with Angular and reactive extensions, you will probably detect that it is very nice that we have an observable here. Because can you remember what Web API is in Angular? It's based on observables. And RxJS, this library that I introduced to you last time when we saw each other, you've seen that you have a lot of interesting functionality here. So you can do things like, oh, if the user changes the screen orientation, I can immediately rerun the web APIs, maybe with a different parameter, get more data back, and immediately with the async pipe change the bindings in Angular to display a completely new user experience based on the new screen state that you have available now. You get the idea? In many cases, people ask me, why should I use this Flex layout stuff? I mean, isn't it better to just use CSS? I mean, it's standard, it's W3C, it's built in the browsers. This stuff is built on top of CSS Flexbox. It just makes it easier to use when you already have Angular. Because, and I repeat myself consciously, it offers you data binding, it offers you a nice integration in the whole templating system of Angular, because you have these new directives and so on, and it gives you observables for changing the behavior of your application. Flex layout, last thing, also changes to a certain degree or extends to a certain degree the capability, where is the documentation? Let me see, where is it? Yeah, here it is. It changes the capabilities of the Angular class binding system. Because what you can now do is you can use, let me see, open the ng class here. I hope they have a nice, yes, they have a nice example here. Take a look at this example. Here we have a div that has a class 0. Class 0 always applies. But then it has an ng class .xs, class 1 and class 2. That means that class 1 and class 2 are only applied if we are on an extra small device. And that's pretty nice, because with this we can easily scale down the font, for instance, in case of very small devices. Get the idea? So it extends the capabilities of Angular of dynamically assigning classes with the media queries that you saw before. And with that, you don't need to write any code to change the class names. It's not just classes. You can use additional things. You can conditionally change styles. You can conditionally change the image sources. That's a very important one. You have a large icon on a large screen, and you have a tiny, tiny icon on a very small screen. With this, you can change that. You can also hide or show things depending on the screen size. You don't need to write TypeScript code for that. Can you remember what I told you? The image button with the disk symbol on a small device and a button that says Save Document on a large screen. You could, for instance, use fx hide and fx show to conditionally switch between the image button and the button with the text depending on the screen size. Okay? Good? Do you see the value of these functionalities? Yeah. Do you understand why this is important? It really, if you just want to add basic responsiveness, I think is the word. If you want to just add basic responsiveness, these tools are very, very, very important. They make your life so much easier. So if you build your final year project and you want to add support for mobile devices, this should be a big helper for you. To be honest, if you build real-world applications where it becomes really complex and the whole behavior of the application looks differently depending on the size of the screen, it sometimes becomes more complex. And this is only the beginning, and you have to build your own stuff on top of it. But for the typical medium-sized, medium complexity project, this is exactly what you use in practice. Good? Nice. If you look for the examples, they are, as usual, here first in my slides. Here you have some sample code if you want to take a look at the sample code. And the sample that I showed you today, you can find it here. In the Angular folder 9120 conference agenda. That's for the new topic.